Hi, I'm Stephanie Rouse, Director of Library Services here at Shrewsbury, and I'm sorry that I cannot welcome you today into the library for an in-person tea and topics, but I would like to help all of you senior school parents with some topics about reading. Today we have two different sections for our topics on teenager and reading. First, we're going to talk about some tips to encourage your teenager to read more. And then we're going to have some information about how to improve their reading comprehension through having meaningful discussions about books. Although I'm sure the bookstore who did this display was thinking of it as a joke, unfortunately, it's actually a true picture from most of our teenagers. A lot of them, when asked, "What are you reading?" the truthful answer is nothing. Now, if your child is already reading voluntarily and with enthusiasm, you don't have the same problems as those parents whose teenagers have decided that reading is boring or they never have time for it. Either way, there are some things you can do to encourage reading, and your involvement in this is the key to success. If you need to get your student reading more, perhaps you should forbid them from reading specific books in your household. As we all know, many teenagers like to push boundaries. And if you create a shelf of books and then make sure your children know these are books you can read when you're older, sometimes their curiosity might get into them and they'll want to try those books just to see why, according to you, they have to wait for them. Now, don't monitor the shelf if you try to do this. Just allow their curiosity to take over. Hopefully, the forbidden nature of books you've selected that you actually want them to read might make them curious enough to read them. When trying to find books to suggest to your child to read, keep it real. Keep it so that it relates to their real life, real experiences, their interests, hobbies, talents, their future goals. Is your child into sports? Then find books on those sports that might interest them. Does your child have a lot of artistic or musical talent? Perhaps a biography or memoir of their favorite artist or musician. If your child is interested in going into a specific career field, maybe even the scientific fields, give them memoirs and biographies of scientists and doctors who've made important, groundbreaking discoveries. If your child loves history, perhaps narrative nonfiction or historical fiction on their favorite time periods will convince them to give reading a chance. As much as we as adults know there are books that will benefit our children a great deal, it's important to give your teenager choice. Allow them to choose the books that they want to read. Being forced to read a book they're not interested in actually has a bad effect, the opposite effect of what you intend on them. Because when they're forced to read it, they refuse to enjoy it. However, once they've started on a book, if they want to stop just a page or two in, encourage them to give the book a chance. I always recommend at least 2 chapters before quitting a book. 3 if the chapters are very short. Because a lot of times, the beginning of a book is just introducing characters or setting, and the real meat of the plot has not yet started. So ask them to give it a shot first, and then, after 2 or 3 chapters, if they still want to quit, have them explain to you why they want to stop reading that book. And saying it's boring is not an explanation. What is boring about it? What is causing you to not enjoy it? And encourage them to vocalize more. Why do we worry so much about this? Well, although we all know people, and maybe you yourself do not enjoy reading, but considering that reading is considered a key to future success, we want to encourage it in all of our students. Most of our world's most successful, richest people attribute success to their reading habits. Warren Buffett suggested read 500 pages every day because that builds knowledge. He usually read 800 to 1,000 pages a day. Bill Gates has set himself a goal to read 50 books a year. That's one book per week. Later on, I'll show you how easily that can be achieved. Mark Cuban, an entrepreneur, reads at least 3 hours every day. He finds the time within his busy schedule. And Elon Musk, when asked how he could know how to build a rocket, simply replied, "I read books." I realize this sounds like a lot being thrown at you all at once, but we all want what's best for the students and for your children. And we know that reading is something that can help make that happen and will actually help them in every single one of their subjects and throughout university and their life. So now are 5 things you can do to help your child to read more. The first one, and probably the most difficult one, is to limit their screen time. I know it's not easy because we all use our cell phones and our devices for so many different things. However, screen addiction is a real phenomenon, and especially with teenagers whose brains are still developing. When they are withdrawing from using their screen, they react emotionally and sometimes even with anger, because removing some of that screen time can cause withdrawal symptoms. But we want them to get away from their screen and have their brains develop as they do other tasks, like reading. One way that you can achieve this with your child is to have a set period of time every day where everyone parks their devices in a box or a basket, including parents, and no one is on their device for that length of time. Another useful thing to implement at your house is family reading time. Find a time that works for you and your family's busy schedule, and everyone in the family reads at that time for a set amount of time. This means all devices put away and you're reading something physical, not something electronic. If you can only manage 10 minutes a day, that's good. 20 minutes? That's great. If your family would be able to carve out 30 minutes of time a day where everyone reads, that would be fantastic. Any amount of time is better than no time at all, and I know sometimes it is difficult to carve out even 10 minutes if you have a busy schedule. Now, third is extremely important. Reading should never be used or associated with punishment. When a child breaks a family rule, they should not be forced to sit down and read, or if their grades are not as high as you know they should be, they should not be forced to sit down and read as a punishment. Punishment is a negative association word, and think about it. If there is something that you think negatively about, would you voluntarily and with excitement choose to do it on your own? Of course not. Reading must be enjoyable for our teens, or they will not value it and they will not want to spend their time doing it. Number 4 can be a fun family activity. Watch a movie, and then all of you take time to read the book that the movie's based on. I know, this seems a little backwards, and it is, but it's going to engage your teenager a bit more with the book. Perhaps you could even have a family contest. See who can find the most changes or differences between the book and the movie. And our final tip, model reading for your teenager. Show them that reading is something that you can do for enjoyment and to gain knowledge. Always have a book or magazine or newspaper with you so that wherever you are that you're waiting in a line or in the car or at the dentist office, read. Don't use your cell phone. Don't check your emails. Don't be texting. Instead, set the example that reading is something you should do to occupy spare time. Hopefully, those 5 tips will work for you in some way and get your teens to start reading. And once your teens are reading, we want to make sure that they're understanding what they read. We want to be building their reading comprehension, their fluency, even their vocabulary and their knowledge. And by doing this, we need to talk about the books that they're reading. So I'd like to share with you some tips and suggestions on how to have those discussions with your child about books. Discussions that will be meaningful and productive. So why is it important for you to discuss books with your child? Well, we all know that student outcomes, their improved fluency, reading comprehension, vocabulary, overall grades in every subject, are going to improve when their parents are involved in their education, especially in those specific subjects. And by involvement, I mean that you are active in learning about what they're learning. Before initiating this conversation about what they're reading, you need to be prepared. Find out what book it actually is that they're reading. You might sneak a peek into their book sack and see what the title of the book is and then look it up online for a bit of a summary. You might ask their teachers what books they're reading in class, or look in their reading log and see what the last book it is that they have written down there. Borrow the book if you can when they aren't reading it, maybe while they're doing their maths homework or while they're at a sporting event. Read. When you've read the book, it's a lot easier to discuss the book. Now, don't worry about what books they are selecting, unless the book is dangerous, teaching them how to do something violent, or books that teach racist ideology, or books that are warning signs for a possible serious situation. By that I mean books that glorify self-harm or suicide or drug abuse, something like that. Now, if a character in the book is contemplating suicide or contemplating an eating disorder or suffering through something like that, that doesn't mean that it's a danger to your child, especially if it's resolved where the character realizes the dangers and stops the behavior or convinces someone else to stop that behavior. It's only if it glorifies self-harm that we need to be concerned. Now, once you've prepared for your book discussion with your teenager, be sure to tread carefully during that discussion. Even if the book is about a subject matter or it's written in a style or you dislike the author, don't judge or criticize what they're reading. Instead, ask them questions with curiosity and not with judgment. So, just 2 things to do as you're getting ready at this point. Prepare yourself with a little bit of knowledge about what they're reading, and be careful not to judge them. As we all do, when we feel judged about our choices, we get defensive. And when we get defensive, we don't have very productive discussions. The discussion itself involves questions and listening to those answers, and then maybe even asking some follow-up questions. You might start by asking your child, what made you decide to read this particular book? Ask them what their impressions are of the main character or other characters. Find out from them what has surprised, amazed, shocked, or even annoyed them the most so far about the book. Perhaps while you're doing something that does not involve really hard concentration, you wouldn't want to do this when you're working on something for your job, of course. Perhaps ask them to read some of the book aloud to you because you find it interesting or you are curious about the book. Make sure you pay attention and then ask questions regarding what this book was about and what they've said. And finally, ask them if you can borrow the book to read. You may have already been reading it, but for them to see that you are interested in reading the book as well might cause them to be interested too. But don't fall into the trap when the child says, "Oh, you can read it now." Have them finish it first. When asking questions and trying to start this discussion, make sure you're not using yes/no questions. We want to have more than one-word answers as they're discussing the book. Ask them if they can describe or explain. Ask what their opinion is about something. Ask them how some event in the book made them feel. Do you remember at the beginning of this TN Topics where I mentioned that Bill Gates set a goal to read 50 books a year, which is almost one book per week? And it sounds such a daunting task if you're not already a reader. However, as you're about to see, it's not a scary task as it might first seem. In order to read one book per week, the first thing you need to do is only read about 30 pages a day. That takes most teenagers and adults 45 minutes to an hour once they're in the habit of reading. By letting your teenager choose books that they will like, they'll be able to concentrate more and achieve that 30-page-a-day goal. You can let them read multiple genres and different types of books, including graphic novels and even audiobooks. Remove distractions. The television and the phone should be off or in another room from where they're reading. And finally, help your teenager avoid reading in bed. Our brains are accustomed to using the bed to fall asleep, and that's not a good idea when you're trying to read. Instead, invest in a comfortable reading chair, and that can be a place for your teenager to always sit and read. So what do you think? Do you think you might be able to even read a book a week? Or maybe a book every 2 weeks, and split those page numbers down to 15 pages at a time. So if you see this, most books are 150 to a little over 200 pages in them. That's why this is such an achievable goal, even if it sounds daunting at first. You might already have that comfortable reading chair, so now encourage your teenager to sit in it as they read. But that turning off of the devices is extremely important to help with concentration. Our main goal is to get students to stop trying that first meme in which you think they're reading, but in reality, they're busy on their phones, to the second meme, where you see them on their phones, but in reality, they're reading. Thank you for taking the time from your busy schedule to participate in today's TN Topics. I look forward to serving you again in the library at some point in the future when our situation becomes more normal. If you have any questions or concerns, please feel free to email me, and my school email is about to be shown on the screen.